Vethani held up my inventory manifest the way you'd hold up a dead fish. 2 fingers, arm extended, expression suggesting the problem was the smell. Consolidated Logistics Surplus Coordinator, he read. Not a question. He said it the way you'd read the label off a box of things you were about to throw out. That's correct, I said. He set the manifest down on my folding table without looking at me again. Behind him, 2 junior auditors were already moving through the compound in their pale green carapaces and their copper antenna clips, running handheld scanners over everything I owned. One of them stopped at the row of manual fuel transfer pumps I'd inherited from a naval depot that closed 18 months ago. He scanned the first one, then the second, then appeared to give up and moved on. I watched all of this from behind my clipboard. I had a lot of things on the clipboard. Vethani was not yet any of them. Caldra's station was not what the Vethani Supply Audit Corps had expected to find at these coordinates. I knew this because Asuran said so, without quite meaning to, when he walked in the front gate and stopped. He stood there for a long moment, antenna clips twitching, doing the alien equivalent of blinking slowly. Then he said, "This is the resupply node." "It is," I said. "For the entire Yenavar forward sector." "The eastern half," I said. "Telvar station covers the western approach, or covered it. Telvar closed in the 3rd quarter when the budget allocation went to the new automated corridors." I waited a beat. "So technically the whole thing now, yes." What Caldra's looked like, to someone who had not been here before. 17 prefab storage units arranged in a rough oval on a red dust flat, 200 meters across. A comms relay tower that I had repaired 4 times in the past year, using parts from 3 different species, discontinued equipment lines. A vehicle bay that held 6 ground transports, 4 of which ran on non-standard fuel cells that nobody else in the sector had wanted. A water reclamation unit pulled from a decommissioned survey outpost. And me, with 8 staff, 4 of whom had been assigned here from positions that had been eliminated elsewhere and hadn't been reassigned back because their files had apparently fallen into some administrative gap that nobody at Central Command found worth closing. Vethani walked the perimeter. I walked with him because it was my station and because nobody was going to stop me. He didn't ask me to leave. He had the manner of someone who had never needed to ask anyone to leave, because people generally left when he arrived. I didn't. We passed the row of salvaged comms relays I'd racked along the east wall. He scanned them. One of his junior auditors made a sound, a faint, pitched note that I had come to recognize. In 18 months of working adjacent to Vethani logistical teams, as the sound of something being written off, like a stylus on a death certificate. "These are discontinued," Asuran said. "They're operational," I said. "They're not in the current approved equipment register." "No," I said, "they're in my equipment register." He looked at me then, really looked. The way the Vethani look when they're recalibrating, that slight tilt of the smooth head, the antenna clips going still. I had seen that look before too. It didn't mean they were reconsidering. It just meant they were filing you under a new category. He filed me under something. I did not ask what. The formal audit classification came through at 1400, 2 hours after Asuran's team left. I read it on my terminal while I was eating lunch. The document ran to 11 pages, which was impressive given that the substance of it could have fit in a sentence. Caldra's station, Yenavar forward sector, had been assessed and formally designated. Residual logistics node, Category 4, operationally non-essential. Retained in inventory at minimal cost basis pending administrative review. Category 4. I filed it, finished my lunch, and went back to work. The next 3 weeks were quiet. The Vethani push into the Yenavar interior was going well by all accounts. Their automated supply corridors were running on schedule. Their optimized routing algorithms were threading convoys through the terrain with an efficiency that the sector command briefings described as unprecedented. I read those briefings the same way I read most things, with the specific quality of attention you develop when you have learned that the word unprecedented tends to show up just before things get interesting. My staff kept working. Harold, my logistics tech, finished the repair on the fourth non-standard fuel cell unit. Das cataloged the last of the unclaimed equipment lot that had arrived from a closed relay post 3 sectors over miscellaneous, the transfer document said. 14 categories of miscellaneous. We found 2 manual calibration kits, a case of water purification tablets, a portable medical scanner, and enough non-standard atmospheric seal tape to secure every prefab door on the station 3 times over. I logged all of it. My manifest got longer. Nobody asked to see it. On a Thursday, I still kept Earth days, out of stubbornness, and because the Yenavar local calendar was 26 hours and gave me a headache. The comms relay went active at 3:10. I was already awake. The relay made a specific sound when a priority grade signal was trying to lock on, and I had trained myself over the past year to wake up when I heard it, the way you train yourself to wake up when a child cries or an engine misfires. I got to the terminal at 3:13. The signal was from Vethani Forward Command, Yenavar Sector Central, Priority Alpha. That was a level I had not seen come through this relay before. It took 40 seconds to decode, which was longer than it should have taken, and I spent those 40 seconds standing in my socks on a cold floor, wondering if I was about to be told that we were being evacuated. The message was not about evacuation. The main supply corridor, Route Sigma 7, the optimized path that Vethani routing had threaded through the Yenavar interior, the backbone of the whole forward push, was offline. Not delayed, not degraded, offline. The convoy that had entered the corridor at 2200 the previous evening, 43 vehicles, was stopped at the junction of Sigma 7, and the route designation I didn't recognize, which the attached terrain overlay told me was a valley passage approximately 80 kilometers south-southwest of my position. The corridor had been routed through a geological feature that the Vethani terrain database had not contained, an active seismic fault zone, mapped by a Yenavar Colonial Survey team 11 months ago, well after the Vethani had compiled their route database. The fault had shifted at 2140. Not catastrophically, no vehicles lost, no casualties. But the passage was gone. 112 meters of road that had existed yesterday did not exist this morning. The convoy was stopped. The supply nodes along Sigma 7 that depended on that route for their own restocking were, by cascade, also offline. The next closest Vethani-designated supply node was 380 kilometers to the north. The message requested, in the careful formal phrasing of an organization that was not accustomed to requesting anything, that Caldra's station provide an assessment of available materiel that might be applied to the forward position's supply deficit. I read it twice, then I got dressed, put on a fresh pot of coffee, and woke up my staff. Harold was the first one into the operations room, still pulling on his jacket. He read the relay over my shoulder and was quiet for a moment. "So they need us," he said. "They need an assessment," I said. "That's what the message says." He looked at me. "It says assessment," I said. "Let's start with the manifest." The manifest was good. I had spent 18 months making it good, not because anyone had told me to, and not because I expected anyone to ask, but because the manifest was mine and I did not keep bad manifests. Every item Caldra's had received since I took command was logged by category, condition, compatibility rating. And this was the part that turned out to matter, cross-referenced against a non-standard equipment index I had built myself, because the Vethani standard index didn't include half of what we had, and the old UEF index didn't include the other half. The non-standard fuel cells, the ones nobody else in the sector had wanted, were compatible with the ground transport units used by 6 of the vehicle types in the stalled convoy. I had enough fuel to move all 6. Harold's repaired pump could transfer it. The discontinued comms relays on my east wall, the ones Ossorin had noted and written off, operated on a frequency band that the Vethani Forward units were no longer using as primary but had not stripped from their equipment. Backup band. I could reach the convoy directly without routing through the dead corridor. The manual calibration kits from the miscellaneous lot could reset the navigation systems on 2 of the lighter vehicle classes without requiring a central server sync, which mattered because the central server for that sector was tied to Sigma 7. The atmospheric seal tape. The amount I had was enough to emergency shore a temporary road surface over unstable ground if someone was willing to put in the time. It wasn't a permanent fix. It wasn't a pretty fix, but it was a fix. I wrote the assessment. It was 4 pages. I included the cross-reference index as an appendix because I suspected that whoever received it on the other end would not have my non-standard index and would need it to understand why anything on my list was relevant. Das looked over my shoulder while I was finishing it. She read the fuel cell section and then the relay section and then the bit about the calibration kits, and she didn't say anything until she got to the tape. "We're going to send them the tape," she said. "Some of it. We might need that tape." "If we need it that badly," I said, "we'll be in a situation where we have bigger problems than tape." She thought about that for a moment, then went to start prepping the second storage unit for vehicle access. I sent the assessment at 5:18. At 5:31, a Vethani courier vehicle came over the ridge from the south. I had not been expecting a courier vehicle. I had sent a message, and I had expected a reply to that message, and then I had expected a further exchange of messages, and then at some point I had expected authorization codes and logistical coordination that would take the better part of a day to sort out. That was how these things worked. That was how they had always worked with the Vethani, who did not make decisions without committee review, and who did not allocate resources without 3-tier approval from the relevant directorate. The courier vehicle that came over the ridge was not a committee. It was a light transport, and it stopped at my front gate, and the officer who climbed out was wearing rank indicators I had never seen outside of sector-level briefing documents. Thin gold bands on the antenna clips, which on the Vethani denoted something in the range of deputy director, above the rank of the auditor who had stamped me Category 4. His name, he told me when I walked out to meet him, was Selm Vorath. He was the Vethani Sector Logistics Director for Yenavar. He had been at the forward position when the fault shifted. He had been there when the convoy stalled. He had been there, specifically, when his team had informed him that the nearest available supply node was 380 kilometers north. And he had been there when someone on his staff had pulled up my assessment and recognized the cross-reference index and come to find him. He stood in my red dust compound, in his gold-clipped antenna and his formal uniform, and he looked at the 17 prefab units, and the comms relay tower, and the row of discontinued salvage on the east wall, and I watched him do the same slow stop that Ossorin had done 3 weeks ago. Then he said, "May I see the manifest?" "Sure," I said. I handed him the clipboard. He read it with the antenna clips perfectly still. That was the Vethani equivalent of attention, not the tilt, not the scan, but the stillness. He read the fuel cell inventory. He read the relay specs. He read the calibration kit entry with its cross-reference notation. He read the atmospheric seal tape count and stopped on that line for a moment longer than the others. "The tape," he said. "In the 3rd unit on the left," I said, "all of it. And your staff can operate the transfer pumps." "Harold's had them running since 400, I said. "We were waiting to hear back." He handed me the clipboard. "What do you need from us to begin?" I looked at my clipboard. I had a list. I had had a list since approximately 400, because that was the kind of person I was, and that was the kind of operation I ran. And the list included authorization codes, transport vehicle access, 3 specific data transfers from the Vethani Central Logistics Server, and a formal amendment to my station's operational classification that I was going to need before I could release Category 4 equipment assets into active use. That last item was the one I was most interested in. The authorization codes, I can send you a template, I said. The data transfers, my comms officer can handle the handshake if your tech gives her the access key. The transport access, Harold can walk your drivers through the fuel cell protocol. It's not complicated. It's just different from what they're used to. I paused. And I'm going to need the Category 4 classification amended before I release anything from inventory. That's non-negotiable. I can't authorize a release on materiel that's officially stamped non-essential. Voreth was quiet for a moment. The antenna clips were still. The classification, he said. The one your auditor assigned 3 weeks ago, I said. Category 4, residual, operationally non-essential. I looked at him. I need that changed before we do anything else. Paperwork first. There was a pause that I would describe, if I were being charitable, as a moment of organizational reflection. I'll authorize the reclassification now, Voreth said. Verbally, the formal filing will follow within the hour. I'll need the filing number when it posts, I said, for my records. You'll have it. Then we can start, I said. We started. Harold's team ran the first fuel transfer by 800. The comms relay locked onto the convoy's backup band at 7:12, 40 minutes of troubleshooting, one firmware quirk that I had documented in my own notes 8 months ago, and then the link held clean. The calibration kits went south with the first courier vehicle. The seal tape went south in 2 loads. By 1400, the convoy was moving. Not through the fault, that would take weeks of proper road work. Around it, on a temporary surface that would hold for approximately 6 weeks under normal load, which was enough time for the Vethani Engineering Corps to survey a new permanent route. The navigational recalibration on the lighter vehicles had taken 3 hours, and a great deal of mutual patience, with the interface differences between human manual calibration kit documentation and Vethani vehicle architecture. But DAS was good at that kind of translation, and the Vethani tech she was working with was, to her credit, willing to follow DAS's lead once she understood what they were doing. I stood outside at 1410 and watched the convoy telemetry scroll across my terminal. 43 vehicles, moving again. The supply deficit to the forward position was going to be on track within 36 hours. Voreth came out and stood next to me. He looked at the telemetry for a while without saying anything. The gold antenna clips caught the Yenavar afternoon light, which was a slightly orange color due to the dust particulate, and he stood there in the orange light in my red dust compound and looked at the numbers. I should tell you, he said after a while, that the audit classification was not personal. I know, I said. Category 4 is a standard designation. We met the criteria. The assessment metrics don't account for non-standard inventory. No, I said, they don't. Another pause. I intend to recommend a review of the assessment framework, he said, to include non-standard and uncatalogued inventory in the operational relevance scoring. That would be useful, I said. He looked at the terminal for another moment. The telemetry was clean. 43 vehicles moving south-southwest toward the forward position that had been waiting since 2140 the night before. Your manifest, he said. The cross-reference index. Did audit have access to that when they evaluated the station? They had access to my standard manifest, I said. The index is supplemental. I built it myself. It's not a required filing. I see, he said. I let that sit for a beat. I can send you a copy, I said, if it would help with the framework review. He turned to look at me then. That same tilt, that same recalibration. Except this time there was something else in it. Not quite what I'd call embarrassment. The Vethani physiology doesn't run to that particular expression. But something in the register of a person who has just realized that the filing cabinet they threw away had the document they needed in it, and that the document had been there the whole time, organized, labeled, and cross-referenced. "That would be helpful," he said. "Yes." "I'll send it tonight," I said, "after the convoy clears the temporary section." I turned back to the terminal. 43 vehicles moving. The comms relay, steady on backup band. The manifest, updated in real time by Harold, who was still running fuel transfer numbers and would be until 1800. My clipboard was on the table inside. The filing number for the reclassification had come through at 1127. I had logged it. The new designation was Category 1, Essential Support Node, Active Operational Status. Category 1. I had not made a big thing of it. I just updated the file, put the clipboard down, and gone back to work. There was a lot of work to do.